You've probably seen at least the trailer for the movie Cocaine Bear and went, how the hell is this based on a true story? Well, it is loosely, and the real story is actually way better than the actual movie itself. The real story behind it all happened in the ancient year of 1985. Police were in the mountains of Fannin County, Georgia, searching for packages of cocaine they believe might have been dropped into the forest. That's when they stumbled upon the body of good old Pablo Eskobear, or Cokey the Bear as some people like to call him. They found the remains of Cokey the Bear surrounded by 40 open containers that had about 75 pounds of cocaine. It was believed that the cocaine bear ripped open the packages before eating the cocaine, before poor Pablo Escobar took too much and overdosed and died from the drug-fueled party. All that was left upon discovery of Cocaine Bear was mostly bones and the hide of Cokey the Bear, but he was still taken in for autopsy. The state's chief medical examiner, Dr. Kenneth Alonzo, was able to find a large amount of cocaine in the 3 to 4-year-old bear's system. Dr. Alonzo found so much cocaine in the bear system that they stated there's no mammal on the planet that could have survived that. It is believed the cocaine bear would have been alive for 30 to 45 minutes after consuming the drug, and would have died from a combination of cerebral hemorrhaging, respiratory failure, hyperthermia, renal failure, heart failure, and stroke. After the autopsy, the bear was likely taken and stuffed and put on display, at one point finding its way to country singer Waylon Jennings, who put the bear on display in his home. As of 2015, the Cocaine Bear was put on display at the Kentucky Fun Mall in Lexington, Kentucky. Well, that might be where our story ends, but how we got there, to me, is a much more interesting story. You may be asking yourself, if a bear got high in the woods, who supplied it? Well, that's debatably an even more interesting story than the Cocaine Bear itself. As I mentioned at the start, the police were already in the mountains searching for packages of drugs. So what led them to search the wilderness in the first place? The answer is known drug smuggler Andrew Thornton. Andrew C. Thornton II grew up on a thoroughbred horse farm before dropping out of college and joining the Army. While serving, Andrew Thornton became a paratrooper for the 89th Airborne Division and earned a Purple Heart during the invasion of the Dominican Republic in 1965. After the Army, he took a second crack at college before quickly dropping out and joining the narcotics office in Kentucky, working for the DEA. During his time on the force, Thornton was described as a paramilitary type personality, in the mold of James Bond, who was an adventurer driven by adrenaline rushes. Thornton then began to become paranoid and made the switch to the enemy team, becoming the leader of a local drug smuggling ring. His ex-wife described him as a philosophical, incredibly disciplined, extremely spiritual, and loyal warrior, with his own code of ethics, who thrived on excitement. Thornton also owned a farm that he called the Triad. He surrounded the perimeter of their property with barracks, barbed wire, and trenches. Kentucky police surveilled the property several times after reports of mercenaries training guerrilla warfare on the property, but no evidence was ever proven. In 1981, Thornton would become known to the authorities by being one of 25 people accused of stealing weapons from the China Lake Naval Weapons Center and trying to smuggle 1,000 pounds of marijuana into the United States. Thornton was able to avoid felony charges for these crimes by pleading no contest to a misdemeanor drug charge and went to jail for 6 months. Imagine that. You stole weapons from the military and got caught smuggling over 1,000 pounds of weed, and somehow you got away with only 6 months. That's crazy, but 'twas the 1980s, and it was organized crime, so who knows how many backdoor deals were made. It should be noted, because it's super interesting, but while on trial, Thornton was leaving a restaurant when he was shot twice in the chest at short range. He, however, survived after conveniently wearing a bulletproof vest. It was later determined by the authorities that he had staged the shooting himself, to trick the judge into thinking his life would be in danger if he ever went to jail. On September 9, 1985, Thornton hopped on a plane full of cocaine in Monteiro, Colombia. He was accompanied by bodybuilder Bill Leonards, who was originally Thornton's karate instructor but was now his hired bodyguard. Yep, you heard that right. Andrew Thornton was hanging out with his karate master. He'd employed it to beat up anybody that might cause them trouble, despite Andrew Thornton himself also bragging that he was an expert martial artist. Ironically, though, Thornton lied to Leonard, saying they were just on a trip to Bahamas, where Thornton was going to be meeting with a couple guys and needed somebody to watch his back. But reality quickly set in for Leonard when they landed in a swampy area of Colombia, and the aircraft was quickly surrounded by men with machine guns. The plane was promptly loaded with 900 pounds of pure Colombian cocaine straight from the source. The plane took off and they were on their way. Things are unclear at this point why he did the following. Either he had miscalculated the fuel and weight of the cocaine and needed to offload as much as he could to continue flying, or Thornton was so paranoid that the police were watching him that he came up with a somewhat clever plan to avoid detection. I'm going with the second theory for the sake of the video, but either way, they have the same end result. Thornton began to force over 200 pounds of cocaine out the side of the plane with parachutes. It is thought that he was going to be able to track the packages using a sort of radio signal. That cocaine floated down to the mountains of Georgia, where our friend Cokey the Bear found some of it and had a party that would last the rest of that bear's life. Thornton would continue his plane across state lines into Tennessee, throwing cocaine out the back with parachutes like a happy Santa to the forest creatures. Thornton then loaded himself up with cocaine in a duffel bag and put on a parachute. Andrew Thornton switched the plane into autopilot, and then he turned to Leonard and said, "I'm really sorry for getting you involved in this. I can see that this is not your thing. You're a family man. Just do as I say, and I'll get you out of here," before the two of them jumped out of the plane shortly after midnight. Now you gotta remember, just before that bodybuilder karate instructor jumped from the plane, he had woken up the day before being like, "Oh, I'm just going to go on a nice trip to the Bahamas with my student," and now he's jumping out of a paranoid drug smuggler's plane into the darkness of night, hoping that the cops, who may or may not be following the plane, aren't there when he lands. The reason they ditched the plane was Thornton was paranoid that the plane was being tracked. It could have been through like a tracking device, or it might have even just been other planes in the sky following him. Who knows? It turned out not to be true. The United States government did come out afterwards and say they were not tracking the plane at all and had no idea that he was up there in the sky throwing little like white dust clouds down on the poor animals. And it should be noted, when they entered Florida airspace, there were a couple of jets that followed them, probably looking for drug traffickers, but they were long past Florida at this point. But he definitely made this plan before they went up there, so it's kind of like maybe he overplanned, maybe he's a genius, but we'll get into that. It was 8:30 in the morning when Fred Myers was waking up for his day. Probably made some coffee, having a nice shave, when he looked out and saw a parachute with a body attached in his backyard. The police soon came and discovered Andrew Thornton had passed away at the age of 40. There are a few theories of what happened. He might have underestimated the weight he was carrying, or he might have simply pulled the parachute too late. A fatal mistake for the ex-paratrooper, who was known for pushing things to the limit and pulling his parachute at the last second. Another is his parachute didn't deploy properly, or he may have become entangled in it when falling from the sky. And there's also evidence that he might have simply just smoked his head when he jumped out of the plane and knocked himself unconscious. But either way, he plummeted from that plane to the earth and died on impact. Oh, and there's also belief that the large amount of cocaine he was carrying whipped up at some point while he was flying and smoked him in the face, knocking him unconscious. The police did find some really interesting stuff on his body, though. They found some rope, 2 knives, 2 pistols, some food, night vision goggles, a bulletproof vest, $4,500 in cash. and about 70 pounds of pure Colombian cocaine in a duffel bag that was estimated to be worth $15 million. Oh, and he has some sweet Gucci loafers on. He also had 6 1-ounce gold, and I'm going to say this wrong, Krogerins. We're going with Krogerins. And I'm sure you're like me and you're like, what the heck's a Krogerin? Probably because I mispronounced it, but also I don't know what a Krogerin. So I Googled it, and he had 6 African gold coins from South Africa. I don't know what he's doing with South African gold coins in his pocket, and nobody else seemed to really go into this detail. I would love to know why he just had gold from South Africa. Maybe that's what the Colombians were paying him. I don't know. Anyways, on with the rest of the story. Leonard, the karate instructor, however, survived his jump, and he landed safely before catching a cab and meeting up with Andrew Thornton's girlfriend at the time. He was told by Thornton not to tell her anything, but immediately just told her everything. It was like, I didn't know he was a drug trafficker. I don't know if he's alive. I don't know if the cops are coming for me. But yeah, thanks for the ride. And she was like, oh, I also didn't know that he was a drug smuggler. Either way, this definitely like affected their lives for a long time. But Leonard was never charged with his crimes. The plane carried on to North Carolina, 70 miles away from the original jump site. The police were able to connect Andrew Thornton to the crashed plane through a key that they found in his pocket. The police were able to uncover 200 pounds of cocaine from the Georgian forest at several different spots. Most of them didn't have giant dead bears laying around it. In total, the plane was originally carrying an estimated $200 million of cocaine at the time. After Andrew Thornton's death, there was a mixed response. Some reports said that, perhaps more than anything, Thornton would appreciate the absurdity of his death. He felt smug in his survivability, his elusiveness, his discretion, and his insulation. He flaunted his soldier of fortune ideology, his professional connections, his skydiving exploits, his macho command of weaponry and spy gadgetry. His ex-wife said she thinks he would have been proud of his infamous end, and said he would have loved the concept of a warrior who fell from the skies. Brian Langton, an assistant United States attorney in Fresno, who prosecuted Thornton for his marijuana charge, said, "I'm glad his parachute didn't open. I hope he got a hell of a high out of that." Anyways, that's the end of our story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I really didn't expect to find a cool wannabe James Bond drug smuggling story when I started researching about the true story behind Cokey Bear, and I am so happy I came across it. You know, the story about the bear is kind of like cool, but it is very like bear does cocaine, bear goes, and then bear dies. But this whole like Andrew Thornton things was very unexpected. Like I just kind of thought like, yeah, it probably came from a plane, but I didn't expect it to be the last trip that drug smuggler took, and that drug smuggler was just crazy. But glad I found it, and I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, and you're still here, you might as well hit the subscribe button. I'm going to be uploading lots of cool stories like this if you like them. And I'll see you next time. And until then, get off my train.